That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Predators, the third directorial feature from David Osit, which premiered at the 2025 Sundance Film Festival in the U.S. documentary competition.
Do you know this director's other films?
Thank You for Playing and Mayor. And no, I have not seen either of those.
What is Predators about? It explores the controversial NBC series that caught potential child predators in sting operations, leading to arrests and its eventual cancellation. What's your pull quote?
Osit posits a thought-provoking discourse on the American media's troubling penchant for vindictiveness and a boundless attraction to schadenfreude in this deliberation on the legacy of To Catch a Predator. To crib from Coldplay, are we part of the disease or are we part of the cure?
Mine. Predators makes for an excellent conversation piece about the intersection of sensationalism and public safety. I thought this was well done.
Yes, it's thought-provoking, and I think that that is the purpose, to make you think about what you are consuming and why.
So the documentary is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is called To Catch a Predator, and that's referencing the Dateline NBC show To Catch a Predator, hosted by Chris Hansen. We talk about the format of the show. We meet some of the actors who played these underage decoys. We meet some of the law enforcement agents who were involved. Some agree with the practices, some don't. Then we move on to part 2, which is called Copycats, but really we're only focused on one copycat. This guy named Skeeter Jean, who has a very popular YouTube channel, and he refers to himself as a professional Chris Hansen impersonator. So he's basically doing like To Catch a Predator meets Punk'd. Then the final segment's called Takedown, and that's referring to Chris Hansen's new show on a network called TruBlu. And the documentary ends with the documentarian interviewing Chris Hansen, which ends in a pretty awkward way. But all of it is sort of held together by this ethnographer named Mark Durand.
Yes.
And he, I think, does a fine job specifically helping the documentarian understand like what it's all about. And the reality is there is no answer, but
No, but taking a step back and looking at like what an ethnographer does is the study of human behavior.
Sure.
And what are the grand implications of this?
We can start with that. In the end, when the documentarian interviews Chris Hansen, he explains to him that he watched the show when he was younger because he himself was a victim of sex abuse, and was hoping that as an adult watching the show that he would glean some sort of understanding of why these predators do what they do. But ultimately, that is not what he got from the show.
Right.
And then asking the ethnographer what he thought as to why people do these things, he basically says that there is no answer.
Well, and he kind of bounces back with a question to the filmmaker, like, why are you making this documentary?
Right. And he says, because I was hoping to maybe get answers as to why, which of course he doesn't. But yeah, this was very thought-provoking. We can start with part 1. So for people who don't know, back in the early 2000s, Chris Hansen hosted this To Catch a Predator show where they basically had people pretending to be underage boys and girls luring predators to a home where there'd be a camera crew waiting and police waiting to at first interview the predator and then of course be apprehended by the police. And so what the documentary is doing is also sort of questioning like the morality of it all, because how helpful is this show?
Yes, because it is the show depends on there being, victims, really.
Well, and the documentary doesn't give any data, but it's like, the show was extremely popular while it was on. Did it actually curb this behavior? We don't get any numbers. We don't really hear from victims and how they feel about the show, really. So what is clear is that it was a TV production and they were looking for sensational things to air, so that people will watch. So then there's this dilemma, and we do get members of law enforcement talking about how they didn't feel good about the show because the producers for the show would come into their town and basically direct law enforcement. And so, again, I think the documentary shines in presenting these questions, but of course not having answers to them. We meet 3 of the decoys, who I thought were all very interesting. One of them, we don't spend much time with her, except there is a moment where she's at home with her own child, who appears to be maybe like 4 years old.
Very young.
Sitting on her lap. And I think a producer asks her about keeping children safe, and she talks about, well, the importance of making sure that your children don't get online and talk to complete strangers. And then this little girl goes, oh, I'm online talking to strangers all the time.
They're friendly.
And the look on the mom's face is like, she's so embarrassed. That was pretty gaggy. The other decoy, whose name I don't recall, she tells the story of how she got on the show. Her dad was in charge of a house that the producers rented to lure predators, and overheard one of the producers saying, we need an actor to play a decoy. And he goes, my daughter's an actor. She looks really young for 18. So that's how she got in. And then she talks about how she really hasn't watched the show since it originally aired. I do have to say, though, for that specific decoy, she is going on my worst hair list. She has beautiful curly hair, but it's clear that like maybe over a year ago, she was bleached blonde, and those ends are fully dead. And I can't believe that she got on camera without getting a haircut. But then the one that was most affecting was a guy who played this young decoy. And they tell a story of an assistant district attorney who was about to be caught. And it appeared to have cold feet, like he didn't want to show up at the house.
Yes, they broke with formula because he didn't show up, but they knew his identity. They thought, this is going to make for great TV.
So they went to his house, the crew of To Catch a Predator and law enforcement. And when they showed up, that assistant district attorney killed himself, shot himself in the head. So listening to that decoy, now an adult, or much more mature, talking about it. At one point he says, like, you couldn't pay me $10 million to do that again. So I thought that was a very troubling moment, because it's also juxtaposed with footage that was not shown previously of law enforcement talking about the situation, in particular a female.
Disgusting.
And it just shows that there's what I found most upsetting about part 1 is the fact that, because we also get never before seen footage of predators being caught and basically asking for help. Like, they're acknowledging what I did is wrong and I'm glad I was caught and I really want help. And then you hear Chris Hansen like, well, maybe we can get you something. And
well, the nature of the show was to dispel empathy and to create monsters. But what's happening with this behavior that is toxic and harmful, it's a social ill. So if we really want to curb it, understand it, and figure out how to help people, this exploits. It's exploitative. This is not the way to do it.
I thought the documentary did a good job of showing that not only was this show in particular, and then when we get to the Copycat, that they're not interested in what rehabilitation looks like, making sure that these people are safe once they get back out into society, but also there's no mention of how parents can keep their children safe.
I think, as a very archaic way to shine a light on a problem, yes, but where do we go from there? Because clearly this was meant to entertain, not to assist in any way. And you have to remember, you're backing people into a corner, you're confronting with them. They are terrified. We are animals. They're saying whatever they need to do to get out of the situation. Rather than, say, revisit them after they've had some sort of rehabilitation to understand, like, where did this come from? Because most victims become victimizers. Like that, these people, this comes from somewhere.
Yeah. So in part 2, we meet Skeeter Jean, who I found to be
repellent, to say the least.
First of all, he says, oh, well, there's no professionalism in this genre of investigative.
So let me try to bring it.
So I'm going to bring it. He even says something like, I'm going to be unique in the space by impersonating Chris Hansen. I think that's the opposite of the definition of unique. But it was kind of disgusting watching how he operates. But I think, again, as a conversation piece, it's very interesting because on one hand, we have people who are doing something that is wrong and they do need to be caught and disciplined.
Yes.
But then it's like by the appropriate people because...
He has this dumbass little badge printed out, the Predatorial Investigation Unit, and we get a close-up of that badge. This man doesn't even know how to spell predatorial.
That's embarrassing.
Okay.
But I thought what was most upsetting about his segment, besides him seeming like an opportunist, like he just wants to be famous, it would seem, is there's a moment when he catches someone and the guy gets really emotional. And again, it's like, I'm not saying we should be fully empathetic to this person who was there to have sex with a 14-year-old
right.
girl. But this person's asking for help. And they're like, oh, well, we can maybe pull some strings. And it's like, what?
What?
So...
Well, this person, because this person they thought was suicidal.
Well, and the real gag is this person, after they're admitting, because the person says, I think I'm going to take my own life because I'm not going to be able to get through this. My life is ruined. And then we see that this Skeeter Jean show is not prepared to offer anyone some substantial assistance.
Because they're not interested in that.
It's also clear that they are not affiliated with law enforcement. They're just going to places, setting people up.
It's vigilantism.
And so for this particular man, when they call the police say, well, we're busy. We cannot get there for like at least another hour. So then it's so awkward because we have this man sitting there in tears, devastated. He knows his life is ruined. He needs help that he's not going to get. And then under false pretenses, because Skeeter Jean's presenting himself like he is law enforcement.
Yes.
I mean, he's wording it in a way that he's not going to get in trouble, but to these people who are in trouble and scared. And the other thing the documentary doesn't do is it doesn't get into the legality of shows like this and where these people end up, how they're able to fight their cases.
Yes.
Because many of them are, you're going to get to this later because you did not watch To Catch a Predator when you were younger.
No.
I have seen every episode. And so I have done research and a lot of people are able to make deals because of how they were caught. But this documentary doesn't get into that. But yeah, watching Skeeter Jean and then his decoy is this lady named T-Coy.
Well, first of all, we need to clown him more because you have this, kind of tragic situation going on. And he said, you've been skeeted.
Okay, yes, let's bring that up because I think...
Ashton Kutcher, you are not.
Well, clearly some people who were victims of sexual abuse as children like these kind of shows because Skeeter's T-Coy...
Yeah,
she says that she was a victim and that's why she does this. So that's that. But from my perspective, I just think that saying you've been skeeted is like trivializing a very serious problem.
And also, yes, there's some base level catharsis, but I would argue that also keeps you in a place of trauma. So for somebody like T-Coy, who should not be doing what she's doing, it seems like, this revenge vendetta narrative that she has going for herself to justify her own actions in this scheme is, I think that it's harming you more than it's helping you in the long run.
She seems like she needs therapy and that this is not helpful for her.
And I think that goes for the decoys from To Catch a Predator and Chris Hansen himself. I think there's a certain level of desensitization. Mm-hmm. And for most people in law enforcement, when you see these kind of behaviors and see the same kind of excuses and really have nowhere to go beyond just kind of apprehending that person and seeing this kind of, only one layer of this much larger picture, I think it's very easy to forget one's humanity in confronting it. I
agree, and I'm not trying to imply that we should sort of sympathize for these people, but I do think that this is a very serious issue, and I will say To Catch a Predator was handled with a little more care than the more modern iterations because in addition, Skeeter Jean is definitely the focus of the copycats, but we do see other people who basically like lure these potential predators to, technically it is illegal to converse with who you think is underage.
Yes, it is.
In this way, so they are doing something illegal, but then luring them to public places and then shaming them. And I don't know. Again, a great conversation piece, because from my perspective, it's like you don't know how that's triggering to people in these public spaces.
That too.
Right? Like, now I'm being confronted as maybe a potential victim of child sex abuse, and maybe I'm there with my child, and then now you have these 4 YouTubers screaming down aisle 9 of Ralph's.
For clicks and subscribers.
I think that this topic deserves more respect and care and seriousness than what some of these more modern iterations are giving it. But then we go to part 3, which is called Takedown. And that's the show that Chris Hansen is now hosting on a new network called TruBlu. And first off, I think it's funny because we meet the co-creator of the network, because Chris Hansen himself says that he thinks all these spin-off shows nowadays, like the Skeeter Jean one, are just doing it for clicks and profit. And they basically have no moral compass. But then listening to Chris Hansen's boss, he's like, oh, after BLM and all these shows got canceled like Cops, there was an opportunity for me to do something. So it's like, well, you are probably worse than...
Their moral compass is lip service only. And I think that's made very apparent in one scenario involving an 18-year-old in Michigan.
Oh my gosh, that was really hard to watch, because we see that Chris Hansen and his show take down this 18-year-old in Michigan named Hunter. And Hunter was about attempting to have an inappropriate sexual relationship with a 15-year-old. And then, of course, they caught him, filmed it, aired it, ruined his life. And then they mentioned, like, well, in Ohio, that relationship would not be illegal.
Because, for instance, Ohio allows a 3-year gap, range.
Right. So, could we maybe make an exception for this Hunter? And so Chris Hansen and his boss, I guess, talk about it.
Handle it gently.
And they say they're going to handle it gently, but they still aired it. And then we get Hunter's mom talking. And I found that to be very emotional, because it's just crazy to think that as a society, I think we need to address these issues harder, because...
Well, their context is important as well, because this kid was still in high school. He was at the beginning of his senior year.
Well, when I was a senior, I started my senior year as a 16-year-old. And then there was a kid in my class who was 20. So that person could have had a sexual relationship with me, and that would have been illegal. Then why are you allowing him in my classroom?
Well,
so I feel like there are a lot of things, even the documentary doesn't bring this up, but even the thought that the age of consent varies across the country, and to me feels really weird.
It is, because it is.
So,
because there are people in certain states that want those lower age ranges to stay that way, most likely.
But I think the best part of the documentary is the final part when the documentarian David interviews Chris Hansen, because it's quite awkward. And he starts off by talking about, he talks about what To Catch a Predator meant to him, but that ultimately it didn't give him what he needed. And then he talks about Hunter and how, why couldn't you have not found a way to not air that?
The gentle thing would have been to approach the family only with it then,
And then Chris says, well, when we found out that his case was expunged, we removed it from the internet or from our platform. But then David reminds him that when you Google this guy's name, the first 5 pages are all about him being a predator. And Chris Hansen goes, well, that'll go away eventually.
Because he doesn't care.
And I just felt like...
It behooves him to, have people to do this to.
I was not impressed with Chris Hansen. I think that he's, a professional journalist. This is his job. Like you said, he needs victims in order to get a paycheck. So, and he says, if my legacy is that I caught predators like this, then I'm happy with that.
Well,
and that's fine.
That's the other false... what's the word I'm looking for? The false logic of this. The Tikoi woman kind of alludes to it more directly, is that, I'll spend 16 hours talking to this guy, and what I like about that is it stops them from, talking to an actual child. It's like, well, that's not how any kind of these social engagements online play out. People are talking to multiple people all the time. So that you aren't saving anybody that way either.
No.
Yeah, Chris, that's what the title is supposed to suggest, is that Chris Hansen, where are you in the cycle of complicity in this? Because he is also a predator. I mean, he has the moral high ground on his side, for sure, and I don't think there's arguing that, but he's also a predator in a way. But, and I think it's especially apparent in that segment where they flock to that assistant DA's house, like so gleefully even. I mean, Chris Hansen is a type of journalist that I would, dare I say, is a scavenger, just as much as he's a predator, because that was like vultures flocking around the carrion.
Well, I think he's an opportunist, and clearly millions of people watch these types of videos, so I think that the question that the documentary posits is what I think makes this so effective is, well, there are a couple. Why are people so fascinated by these types of shows, and what good is it doing?
Again, as you said earlier, you watched all the episodes. I remember I knew that the show existed, and it would come up in various references. They even have clips from 30 Rock and The Simpsons. Like, you were confronted with it somehow, even if you were watching it. But, think about what you're consuming all the time. That's really toxic, negative energy.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a fascination with the abomination, like staring at car wrecks. And I think, for some people, it could be cathartic. For some people, it could be a reminder to not do bad things. I mean...
well, as Isabelle Huppert says in the film Elle, shame is not a strong enough emotion to stop anyone from doing anything at all. And clearly, this show was not shaming people not to give into these... these desires.
Some of the predators recognize Chris Hansen. They even say, like, I knew this was going to happen. So clearly that's the case. But, I do think that this is a great conversation piece. And
I think it goes hand in hand with what other daytime talk shows, that Jerry Springer mentality, that Dr. Phil even we talked about after this. And, to a degree, Oprah was responsible for ushering some of these people into our lives on the television that we know about.
Well, exploiting very serious situations and then not really offering any help. There's no aftercare or rehabilitation for these people. What are the victims getting? Like,
Unsolved Mystery gave us updates about what was happening with the shit they were showing us. Like, what's happened to these people? Like, the thing is that we don't care collectively. And that is actually the problem, is we don't care about anybody. All we care about is our own entertainment and our own satisfying our own fascination with the darkness. But, if we're not helping people out of it, if people can't see that there's an avenue out of it, that there's no hope, because who are these people even talking about? These people can't even talk about their fantasies with people. We just automatically demonize them. Well, we're never going to figure out how to stop it. So there's always going to be a continual cycle of children being victimized globally. I mean, they go back to the case that inspired Chris Hansen to do this. And I mean, watching footage from then was horrific as well. So how are we working together to curb it? We're not. It's like gasoline on the flame.
Yeah. What would you give this documentary?
And I have to say, I really liked Marc Durand as a very tranquil kind of screen presence. And I think that the documentary really picks up speed when David Osit kind of brings his own, personal stamp to this particular subject matter. But I would give it 3.5.
I think it's very good. I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.